Welcome to the second in a series of ISCA videos. In this tape, we'll take you into the classroom with George and Matt Fisher. For the next 3 hours, we'll be discussing rules and tactics. George Fisher is an 8-time Interlake National Champion and world-class lightning sailor. Matt Fisher is a 3-time Collegiate All-American and most recently won the gold medal at the 1992 Pan Am Games in the lightning class. We hope you enjoy our video.
Thanks, Jeff. This is just a sample, as Jeff mentioned, in a classroom setting of what we do in our club every year. And obviously we're not professionals, but we're just going to go through the rules and tactics as they apply to each part of the race. And we're going to take you right around the race course, starting with the starting area, the starting line, going upwind, around a weather mark, downwind, a jibe mark, and then dead downwind and back to the finish line. Now we're not going to cover them by number. And this is a relatively long tape, so it's not going to be something I think you're going to sit in one setting and watch the whole thing. But what we hope you'll do is take it by sections. And for example, maybe you just want to hear the rules and tactics for the starting area. And then I would suggest that you also supplement this with other books that are available on rules. For example, Dave Perry's book, Elstrom's, they do a real fine job. And if you can read those at the same time you're going over this tape, it'll be very helpful. And incidentally, Dave Dillenbaugh has an excellent tape strictly on rules. And in that tape, he goes through the numbers, and we're not teaching it that way. We're trying to get you to just have these rules become second nature to you. And so that when you're in a given situation, you don't necessarily know the number, but you know this is a rule. And so without any further ado, let's get going. In this course, we're going to go through the race course from the beginning to crossing the finish line. And we're not going to be able to get into the rules insofar as numbers are concerned, or certainly by this book. And incidentally, in my opinion, this is not the way to learn the rules. The way you learn the rules is you get a book, something like this, that has explanation on the different rules, and you take your time in studying them. But we're going to try to go through this tonight and go through it as basically as we can, but still you have to cover some of the more technical parts of it. And then in conjunction with that, Matt will cover the tactics as they are affected by the rules and as the tactics can be applied with the rules. So without any further ado, let's get going. As you know, when you get to the racing course, that's when the racing rules apply. You have some basic rules getting out to the course, but that never seems to be a problem. Once you're there, the racing rules are in effect, but for disqualification purposes, it only applies from the 5-minute gun on to the starting gun. So up to that time, if you were to foul somebody, as long as there wasn't boat damage, there's no disqualification. And we're going to approach this on the start as if it's a fairly good line. You can cross a line on starboard tack. You can also cross it on port tack. This is the weather end, the leeward end, and the wind's pretty well straight. And this is from the direction all the time we're talking in this course would be coming from the top of the board. And so right now we have these boats, of course, on starboard tack. Now let's just go through some basic things that we have to understand before we get started. First of all, as long as you are after that line, a part of your boat, as long as any part of your boat, your crew, is behind the line before the start, of course you have a fair start, as long as you're not fouling someone. But if any part of your boat or your crew is over the line, you lose your rights only when you start to come back to return to the line. As long as you continue on the course, you maintain your rights. And that's important to know, because if you do get in a situation where you're over the line, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you got to get back there, but you also have to understand as soon as you turn to go back, you lose your right of way. Until that time, as long as you remain on the wind or going towards the next mark, you retain your rights. It's very important. We're going to get into around the ends rule, but I think let's stop right now. We're out on the course, and we're there early enough to get a feel for the wind. Let's turn it over to Matt now. And Matt, what do you do to get yourself prepared to start?
Okay, again, I'd like to emphasize that we're assuming that the boat is set up for the conditions and boat speed and tuning and that type of thing for preparing yourself for the conditions that day are already prepared on your boat. What we're going to do is, once you're out on the race course, talk about rules and tactics and how they apply. Again, to reemphasize what my dad just said, to do this in a couple hours is a tough thing to do. When we drove a 16-hour round trip to Annapolis and talked tactics for probably half of it, my brother and I traveled to North Carolina and back and read this book out loud in a total of about a 20-hour trip. And it may not sound like we're a whole lot of fun to travel with, but what we're trying to say is we're trying to condense a lot of information and put it into a 2-hour tape, and we're going to go over the basics here. But when we get out to the race course, what we're trying to do is plan what we do after the starting line. Primarily, make sure the boat is prepared to sail around the race course, but we also want to make sure we have some type of game plan to get an idea what the wind is doing. And we want what we call is to kind of track what the wind is doing the 45 minutes before the start. What I want to try to explain in the next couple minutes is what we mean by tracking wind shifts and what we do on our boat to try to make sure we have a good idea what the wind is doing. We try to get out on the race course about 1 hour to maybe 45 minutes before the 10-minute gun, so we have a good idea historically what the wind is trying to do. To try to put this in a simple explanation, if the wind is coming from this direction, and let's call this a mark, and this a mark, it sounds like we're going to be very basic here, and if you're going on an upwind course on port tack, your track would go like this. Now if that wind shifts 10 degrees to the left, your course would end up like this. This distance over the course of about a half mile turns out to be about 100 yards for every 10 degrees. It's a very large distance for every degree of a shift. What we're trying to do is track those different readings or those different angles to the wind that you have and get an idea of what the wind is doing. On our boat, we use a compass. Now, a lot of people don't use compasses. They think if you sail in a river or a small lake, or that you know the area well enough that you don't need a compass. We use a compass on our own home lake. And I'm going to go back to this condition here. You have these two angles on one tack, and let's just say they were separated by 20 degrees, and in the middle you would have an average course. And then on the other tack, you would also have two different angles with an average there. So again, a lot of people think that they can tell what their different angles are. If you have a shoreline and a photographic memory, you possibly could be able to pick out where you are when you started the tack and be able to tell if you're aiming towards a different point on land at the end of that tack. But it's a lot easier to do this if you use your compass. And what we do is get out early, start writing down numbers on your headings, and be able to track whether or not you have a difference in your angles here. So by if you spend about 15 minutes on port tack, you might end up with several different numbers. You might end up 80 for a while, then you might pop up to 75, and you might go to 90. And that could be the range between these two angles. And then you would pick your normal as the average between the high and the low. And then you'd flop over on the other tack, matching what your low would be and maybe what your high would be. Get yourself on the new tack and try to match your highs and lows on each tack. And so by the time we get down to the start, we have two numbers. We have a number on port that is this average number here, this dotted line that is average between the low port and the high port. And then we have this dotted line here, which is the average between this low starboard and this high starboard. So that by the time we get started, we're only working off of 2 numbers, one on port tack, one on starboard tack, and we have a good idea what the wind is doing. It helps us get prepared for the start as far as what type of tack we'll be starting on, that type of thing. Do you want to get into preparing for this start?
Well, let's get into the starting rules, and we'll come back to when Matt comes back to the line. We're going to hit the definitions as we use them in the explanation of the rules. First, let's just start with, we're at the middle of the line, and it's 5 or less minutes before the start. What rules are in play at that time if we're in the middle of the line on starboard tack? We have 2 basic rules that we'll be working with throughout this whole course, and then all we do is make exceptions to them. Starboard and port and windward and leeward. Starboard and port are relatively simple, obviously, and we just know that starboard and port before the start, it seems to be in a situation until you get down to maybe the last minute and a half to 2 minutes. It's kind of forgiven on starboard and port. Not that you want to foul somebody intentionally on port, but we don't worry about that. It's a matter of ducking each other and recognizing the starboard boat has the right of way. Now, that doesn't apply, obviously, once you get closer to the starting time, and that's why I said something like a minute and a half. But when you're on the same tack, the leeward boat has right of way. And we just take those 2 rules, starboard and port, windward, leeward, and throughout the rules now that we'll study, there are exceptions to those. Now let's just make sure we understand windward, leeward. It's basically the leeward boat has right of way. Now, how does he establish that right of way, and what right of way does he have? You're going to hear throughout the course, proper course. But there is no proper course before the start. What takes the place of that? If the red boat is to leeward of the green boat, in this situation, the red boat can take the leeward boat, the weather boat rather, up to the leeward boat or the red boat's to its close-hauled course. Now, what is the close-hauled course? It's the course that that boat would sail if that boat weren't in its way and to go as fast as it could upwind. Now, this green boat then has to recognize that the red boat has the right of way in this situation to take it up to its close-hauled course. Now, let's talk about luffing. Luffing is any time you turn your boat a little bit sharper towards the wind. It's not necessarily luffing your sails and when you envision somebody really up and head into the wind. It can be going from a full reach to a little closer reach, and that is a luff. So the fact that this leeward boat would just change 5 degrees farther into the wind, it has luffed at that point. Now I'm going to distinguish, and you don't see this in the rule book, but you will have, I think it's easier to understand the rules in this particular situation if we distinguish between a tactical luff and a proper course luff, and in this situation we'll call it close-hauled luff. A tactical luff would be if you were forward of this boat's mast line, you could take it head to wind. Now we have to define mast line. Mast line is when the weather boat skipper sitting in his normal tiller position can sight the leeward boat's mast. And there is a differentiation between that and once we get past the line. So let's just stick with this for the moment. So we know right here that the leeward boat in this situation, because it does not have mast line on the weather boat, can only take it up to the red boat, to the leeward boat's close-hauled course. Once it breaks through the mast line, that is, this skipper now sighting from his normal sitting position as skipper can no longer sight the mast of the leeward boat. Now this boat can take it on a tactical luff, and that means it can take this boat head to wind. But it has a restriction on that now before the start, and that is it has to do it initially slowly. So it just doesn't break that mast line position and jam it up. It has to do it more slowly than it will once it clears the line. It has to give that boat the opportunity to respond to this luff. Now, supposing that it has broken the mast line position, and now we know it can do a tactical luff. It can actually go head to wind if it wants to, so long as it initially does it slowly. But we also know now that once this boat has mast line on it, this lured boat now is restricted again to only going up to its close-hauled course. So that situation of it between a close-hauled luff and a tactical luff can change just by the fact of this mast line position being changed before the start. So until this boat coming from astern establishes this overlap, there's no obligation on this green boat to anticipate this luff. The red boat would come up from behind, establish its overlap, give this weather boat time to assume its new obligation to keep clear, and then it establishes its right. And at that point, it can force the weather boat to go up to the lured boat's close-hauled course, but must do it initially slowly. We also know now that if it breaks through the mast line position, it can also take the boat, then the weather boat, up to head to wind. Now, that applies throughout the line, but we seem to hit it more between the weather end and the lured end, which we will get into those rules just in a moment. But let's switch back now to Matt. And Matt, how do you find these rules apply as far as tactics concerned in the middle of the line, or not taking into consideration at this time either the weather end or the lured end, but just as your starting is concerned, just get back to the line now and see what you're going to do.
Okay, before we get all the way back to the line to prepare ourselves for the start, we want to figure out which end of the line is favored. And there's several different methods that we use, and I'd like to just briefly show how we're going to get to one side or the other, and then we'll get into the actual grinding out side by side with boats on the line. Similar to the wind shifts that we were talking about before the start, the reason that finding the correct end of the line is so important is because if the wind, you want to assume that the line will be set perpendicular to what the wind is, and then when two boats would meet, they would meet just about in the middle of the line on a close-hauled course. If a boat started on port from the leeward end and a boat started on starboard from the weather end, they would meet right in the middle, and that would be considered an excellent line. Unfortunately, not all lines are quite that way, and if the wind is slightly to the right, the boat starting on the right side of the starting line will sail significantly shorter than a boat that started on the left-hand start of the starting line. So it's important to know which end of the line is favored, and with the way that we sail very conservatively upwind, it's important to be at that end at the starting gun. So there's 4 different ways, or there's probably more, but there's 4 different ways that I know of to check which end of the line is favored. One simple one, and to move over to here, would be to, where the green boat, luff up head to wind, and as you luff up head to wind, how your bow is pointing on this imaginary line between the leeward end and the weather end, which side it's pointing closer to would be the favored end. Another way would be to sail along that imaginary line, aiming directly towards one end of the line. In this case, we're heading towards the weather end with your main cleated. And then tack and check how, keep the main cleated as you head back, and see if the main is full or luffing slightly. And if it's luffing, the side that it's luffing towards would be the end that is favored. We really have trouble with, I personally have trouble with those 2 methods because they have minor flaws in them. One of the ways that I like to use is watching other boats go head to wind, because it's much easier to be in the red boat, and watching the green boat is significantly easier to figure out which end of the line is favored by observing somebody do that than it is to be doing it yourself. I have a very difficult time figuring out if the boat's aiming 4 or 6 degrees closer to one end than the other. So I'd prefer to watch another boat. But the most foolproof method that we use now is to luff head to wind, make sure your boom is directly over the center line of the boat, take a compass reading, mark down that compass reading, and then head, immediately after you take that reading, head towards, put yourself on that imaginary line between the weather end and the leeward end, aim towards the leeward end, and get another compass reading. If that number is greater than 90 degrees, then the wind is slightly to the right and the weather end is favored. If that number is less than 90 degrees, that means the leeward end is favored. Doesn't matter what kind of boat you're sailing. You can be in a laser, you can be in a soling, it's going to work. We use that, it's flawless. And I think once you try to match that with some of the compass readings that we were talking about before the start, it'll help you put how the starting line sits and what angle of wind is blowing in at the time. So maybe we talked about that a little quickly, but I think again it's very critical that you take your time on getting the head to wind reading, write it down, and then put yourself perfectly on the imaginary line. So a foolproof way to figure out which end of the line is favored. Okay, so once we've figured out which end of the line's favored, we want to try to start within that 1/3 of the end. We divide the line into thirds. This third would be the leeward end, this is the middle, and this is the weather end. In a perfect world, with no other boats around, if you wanted to start, have the perfect start, and you were the green boat, you'd pick your spot on the line, you thought it was maybe 5 degrees favored to the right. You would sail away from what we used to call a time start, sail away from the line for maybe a minute, and then have a full head of steam and hit that line perfectly at, with being full speed for 1 minute, knowing that you had the boat going as fast as it could upwind. Now, that would be if there were absolutely no boats around. The next most perfect way to do it, and maybe not a realistic world, is just like in the books. You come up on port tack, and you tack below all these boats. You hold them up with 25 seconds to go. You bear off into this wonderful hole that you've built. You get going full speed, and you hit the line at the gun, and you have the best start. Again, those two situations are not always reality. And what we want to try to do in the next couple minutes is talk about where the start is won or lost. And that is using or being aware of the rules that are in effect, and really breaking down the start into where you win or lose. These two situations I just named had us at full speed, clear air, and at the proper position on the line at the gun. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. What we really want to try to do is get rid of a lot of the time that you spend trying to maybe pick that position those 5 minutes before. The start actually becomes the most critical in the last minute or possibly the last 45 seconds before the gun. We use a port tack approach. Once we've chosen which end of the line we want to start in, whether it's leeward end or weather end, it's just a matter of how you position your boat. And we put our boat on port tack, going below the line probably 4 to 5 boat lengths, looking for a spot where it'd be best for us to get our position on the line. And in the two instances that I named where I was trying to be a little bit facetious on the type of starting, what the key to both those was that the boat was at full speed and there were no boats below. And what we were trying to do now, when we have a lot of boats on the starting line, is we'd start on port tack, looking for a position to put our boat in the last minute before the start, so that we can have as much full speed as we can at the gun. A port tack approach puts your boat in control of where you tack. If you're the red boat up here and you've been sitting, luffing on the line, waiting for a hole to open up, and you've been sitting there for 4 minutes, you really don't have control as to where you can be and how fast you can go at the gun. If you're on port tack, you are able to keep your boat moving, looking for the right spot, and tack at the opportune time when you see an opening for you to tack into. So let's assume that we get up on the line, you find a hole, you haven't been fighting for the last 3 minutes before the gun, and what do you do to get your boat in a position so that you have as much full speed and you're on the line with the gun. There's a couple different rules that we like to keep in mind to try to ensure a good start. First thing is if you are able to coach your people on your boat, the team, to use all the eyes on deck to keep track of what's going on. If you're using 3 people, it's good to have all 3 people participating in how you're going to start the boat. Explain what you're going to do, explain that you're going to be on port tack, explain that you're going to try to tack at about 1 minute so that everybody's prepared for that maneuver. And also let each person know, the front person and the middle person and the skipper, who's going to watch what. There are at least 4 different areas, maybe 3, that you're looking for before the start. Once you've tacked into your hole, or once you've tacked into your position. The skipper is the most convenient place for the skipper to look, is to lure, to make sure that you're properly lined up fore and aft with the lured boat. We find the person on the jib, or whoever is really the best at telling the distance from the line and being able to cite how the surge of boats to weather are moving, to be able to look up to weather and say, we're in good shape, it looks like the fleet's at about, our bow's about even with the fleet above us. And then one more person, if you're able to have that person on the boat, to look back behind, because as my dad was just talking about a couple minutes ago, the boat that can probably do the most damage to your start, that you have the least amount of control of, is the boat that comes from behind and takes the hole that you're trying to take. Again, we use a port tack approach. There's a lot of people who sit, like I was talking about, in the red boat for probably 3 minutes before the gun, and they find that the most comfortable way to find their position on the line. There's also people who use a starboard tack approach who come along behind the boats, behind them, and find the hole that way. I have never personally been comfortable doing that. There's a lot of people who have been successful using that method. I think you need to use that more as the wind picks up and more velocity. But those are the people who ruin my starts. But it is always helpful to have an individual on your boat looking back and calling out when somebody is trying to come into this area below you. Now let's take just a time out, and the types of things you're trying to do. We're going to create a hole here, and then we're going to talk about how to keep that hole. Obviously, a way to create a hole is to luff up the boats to weather. But when you luff up the boat to weather, you really don't want to get in a position where you're significantly ahead or significantly behind. You want to try to keep the boat that is directly to weather going about the same speed as you. And a side note to this is you don't want to let your boat get completely stopped, because then you're at everybody's mercy around you. But you want to slowly luff up your boat to weather and do the best you can to keep yourselves even. Once you've created this hole to weather, you're going to have the boat that's coming on starboard and a boat that's on port try to come into the hole. What everybody will show you to be very, to make it unattractive is, what we've heard a million times, is to aim down into this hole and try to make it look like that hole really doesn't exist, or to make it look very unattractive. I think more than anything else, what you want to do is to build some speed in your boat. And maybe this is something we haven't talked about very much. Get your boat going a little bit fast so that when somebody who's very determined to get in there comes in, that you have enough speed to luff up further away from this boat. Unless you're just able to fend this person off by laying way off. I don't know that that scares people away, because when you're in that position, this boat assumes a lot more rights than it did before you lay it off. What we do is just try to get the boat going fast, maybe get a little distance between us and the boat to weather of us, and then luff up, head to wind, as quickly as we can to get away from that boat once this white boat chooses to take that hole. They're not going to expect you to leave them that quickly by luffing up head to wind. So that's how you take care of the guy that is coming in on starboard, which is, I think, one of the most difficult to take care of. The port tack approach, I think, is actually a little bit easier, because you can lay off and you do have the rights. When you're on starboard tack, you haven't lost anything. You've actually gained more, because you've probably picked up a little bit of speed. It is a very unattractive area to tack into. You just have to keep your eye on them to make sure that once this boat that was on port tack to try to tack into your hole has chosen not to, that you get your boat back up as close as you can to the boat to weather so that you don't lose any of the hole that you've been building for the last 45 seconds or so. The next and most important thing, and this may sound like I'm getting through this section of one-on-one in the trenches here, as we call them, is the practice that it takes in the boat to accelerate your boat to go faster. I think that is what makes the difference between a good start and a bad start, and it's what we call pulling the trigger quicker or better than the people around you. And just like you go out and you practice jives or you practice tacks, practice accelerating is more important than any jibe you'll ever do in the race. How quickly the jib comes in, how you take care of the heel, how you steer the boat up. You don't want to necessarily be right on the wind, but you don't want to have to take all the liberties to reach down. I am totally convinced that your crew work and teamwork in the boat at this point on the race is the most critical at any time on the race course. And I think going out and getting in the boat, letting your boat stop all the way this time, and then hit the stopwatch and trim your sails in a way that you can estimate how long it takes to get to full speed. You'll be amazed. It'll take even some of the smallest boats, even lasers and small high-performance boats like 470s, probably 15 seconds to reach full speed. Some of the bigger boats that we sail will take even longer. So the better job you can do pulling the trigger to get your boat to full speed is what really makes the difference right here. It also doesn't hurt, though, to keep an eye on the boat to leeward and try to get a jump on that boat. And again, we don't have any magic on our boat. Again, something that I am not very good at is being able to tell if I am 1 boat length from this imaginary line or 2 boat lengths, because I don't know, and when we have somebody on our boat who tries to communicate whether you're 1 boat length or 2 boat lengths, I don't know if it is 2 boat lengths at this roughly 45-degree angle, or if it's 2 boat lengths directly upwind, or if there is a sag that you really can't tell. I think that's why it does help, though, to have someone on the boat that is gauging how you're doing to the fleet. I don't think I've had starts where, because I can guess the spot on the line, we look like that on the gun because we could estimate the sag. A lot of people try to talk about sag. It's the same, whatever problem I have in being able to tell which end's favored when I left head to wind. I think that dysfunction is related to not being able to tell the sag and the line. But we do want to be able to tell how we are into the boats around us, to weather and to leeward, and being able to get a jump on them, work your boat quicker so that you can accelerate before the people on each side of you is probably the key to getting a good start. Is there something that you want to add?
Any questions? Okay, good. One more thing on this windward leeward. We were talking about only being able, the leeward boat only be able to take the weather boat up to close haul in this position, breaks this mast line position which we've defined, now can actually take him head to wind as long as he initially does it slowly. I want to keep in mind that this weather boat, to protect that situation, can, in an effort to maintain this mast line, can luff on a higher course than the boat to leeward. So if the white boat were just to maintain the same course, if in this situation it had broken the mast line position, the weather boat could luff up sharper and still claim mast line. Many times these things don't happen, as we just heard on the tactics, as quickly as we could, and that's very technical, but I want to make a distinction between that and after we clear the starting line. Okay, let's move on to the weather end of the line. The rule we're going to be working with now is called the anti-barging rule. The anti-barging rule really should be divided into 2 parts, basically, but we have to understand, again, the basic rights of this weather end of the line. The red boat, during this 5-minute sequence, say up to the last minute and a half or so, or certainly before the blue boat is making now its final course to the line, does not have to give the blue boat room to pass between it and the mark. It's one of the strange situations we find in the racing rules where this is the case. And it doesn't make any difference in this situation. It actually literally could luff the blue boat past this, assuming that this is just a regular mark, say a flag or a buoy of the course, could actually luff the blue boat to weather that mark. And it can either do that with a tactical luff, or it could do it on a close hauled course luff by just keeping the blue boat from coming between the red boat, the lured boat, and the mark. All right, but now, as we're approaching the line, again, the lured boat maintains its rights, and it has its two rights: close hauled course right with no mast line, with a mast line positioned by the weather boat, and tactical luff to weather, head to wind if necessary, to the weather boat to keep it from going between it and the mark. But now as we get close to the weather end, once the gun goes, now this lured boat has picked up a couple of restrictions. One, to keep this blue boat from going between the lured boat and the mark, which we just discussed before this time, it didn't have to give it room before the mark. Now it doesn't have to give it room, but it can't keep it from claiming room by sailing above close hauled. And we've already defined close hauled. It's the course it would sail as if that boat weren't there to go as fast as it could upwind. Or it can't sail above a course to the first mark. Now, most of the time in the lines that we've been talking about tonight, this is not a problem. But if you were starting on some sort of a reach or in your big boat race, you'd have to have a compass course to the first mark. And keep in mind that if you're the lured boat, to keep this boat coming between you and the mark, you can't sail above a course to that first mark. So those are the two restrictions. Anti-barging rule. And that's just something that's, to me, it's a misnomer for the title, but that's what we have. There are some more intricacies to this rule, and most of our committees are on the weather end, and they usually have a pontoon boat of some sort. And it would come under the definition of an obstruction. And to define an obstruction is if you're a boat length away from that obstruction, that you have to take a radical course to get below it, or to weather of it. And so let's assume for the moment, and we'll get into the obstruction definition later, that it does meet the definition of an obstruction. Now you still maintain the same right as a lured boat in not having to give this boat room to go in between you and that weather mark and the obstruction, but you have to be careful, and this is something you want to read carefully and think about. Once you allow that boat to come in there, and you give no indication that you're going to do anything to keep it out, and now it passes to the point where it can no longer swoop out of that situation, and it's stuck there, it's too late then for you to claim the anti-barging rule, and that is that you can still go up to your close hauled course. You've let him get in there. And you could do it back here, but once you allow him in here and you give no indication to him that you're going to keep him from doing that, you've waited too long. Okay. Let's just cover the lured end, Matt, and then we'll come back to tactics. Let's go down to the lured end now. And there's just some finer points, again, we should keep in mind here. Let's first switch the race committee if they decide to be at the lured end. And sometimes I think they think if it's marks, say, to starboard, they should be in the port end. And that really is not a requirement. But and anyway, you will have race committee boats down at that end with an anchor out. And if the white boat, after the gun, is in a situation where it cannot fetch, it cannot sail past that anchor line or that boat, any part of it, as we will see later in the course, if you're in a lured boat like that and you had an obstruction or a right-of-way boat that meets the definition of an obstruction, it could hail that boat around. But in this situation, it can't. And you're really in no man's land at that point. And the only thing this white boat can do is either luff its sails, bear away, jibe, or whatever, but it cannot hail this boat around, particularly if it can fetch that. So that lured end can be dangerous if you're not careful. The other thing we want to keep in mind is that lured end, that mark gives you no rights to claim to the weather boat that you want to get in between there. And so the best way to explain that is that the white boat in this situation has no right to claim to the weather boat that I need room between this mark and the green boat. The only way it can get room is if, by sailing its close-hauled course, it can make the green boat go up higher and still get past that mark. But, for example, as we'll see later, say going around a weather mark, if it were the tactic to do, it actually could luff to force this green boat to go higher to get around that mark. But as we see in this situation, since the green boat has mast line, it cannot sail higher than close haul, the course that it's on. And so if that doesn't give it the room to get between that boat and the mark does not give it any right of way. Okay, so that's the two ends of the line, and this is the luffing rule in between. And now, Matt, why don't you explain what your experience is as far as weather end and lured ends, and what they would do if you find that the line is favored either one of those ends.
Well, like we talked about a couple minutes ago, once we've found which end is favored, we start within that 1/3 of that favored end. And I want to emphasize, when I say 1/3, we want to be very close to that end. But if you've ever watched a start, there's a couple things that jump out at you. And preferably you don't watch a start that you're actually participating in. But if you ever watch another fleet start, and a large fleet, larger than 12 or so boats on the line, you'll be very, I'm always very impressed with the differences in speed between what looks like the front row and the people who form the second, third, and fourth rows. And what I mean is when the gun goes off and you're over here, and this is our starting line, leeward end and weather end, if you're over here watching, the fleet spreads out apart from each other fore and aft very quickly. The people in the front row are exponentially moving quicker than the people in the second row. I think that factor is even exaggerated when you get to each end. We know the anti-barging rule, and I know it so well that I've never had to use it before, and I really don't want to. But that doesn't mean we stay away from that end of the line, but we stay away from being the 3 or 4 boats that are at that mark. And there's a lot of people who like to be that aggressive, to be right there at the race coming boat if it's favored. But that example that I was talking about, people slowing down, we find that when you have a line that's favored, that there is a, for lack of a better word, there's a pile of boats that seems to slow itself down in the very close proximity. I'm talking the 3 or so boat lengths from that favored end. Down here, we'll start down here, and for some reason be able to gain speed on them. Even though they have a slight advantage because that end line's favored, it seems like we're able to have more speed at the gun because they're fighting that much harder because they're attracting more company. Same way down at this end, people are fighting to make the line, and we'll be the blue boat up here. We'll start above that favored end. This is exaggerated. It looks like we're in the middle of the line, but I didn't mean a word. We just stay away from that very tight pile of boats that are at each end. I think it's more critical for a lot of the different factors that the leeward end seems to create a lot of problems. I think one thing I touched on a couple minutes ago, but maybe didn't explain well enough, is that one of the most deadliest parts about a start is that the more leeward end favor it has, the more difficult it is to keep the boat below you off your bow, just by the sheer nature of the way that you're pointing to the boat, to the line. At the weather end, it may not be quite so bad. The boats are just naturally going to open up a little bit. So, but still, that doesn't necessarily change the problem that happens where boats spread out at the gun. So we actually don't use the anti-barging rule that much. We know it, but we try to stay away from that immediate pile, away from each end.
Okay. Any questions? Another situation you'll hit before the start is, or at the start, is the round the ends rule, and that's demonstrated by the race committee boat with the I flag. And it used to be that it could be in the instructions, still can be in the instructions, I shouldn't say that, but it was automatic that on the second start, unless the rule said otherwise, that the round the ends rule was then going to be in effect. Now it is, the rule is, unless the instructions say otherwise, that there's no round the ends rule in effect unless an I flag is up. Now, that's why you should read your rules, racing rules, or instructions rather, very carefully. And that's one of the things you want to check on is how do they describe the round the ends rules. And many times still today they'll say it'd be on the second start. But unless they say that, there has to be an I flag go up. Now, what does that mean if it goes up? What that means is that if you're over the end during the line at the last minute before the start, you have to go around one of the ends. And for example, if you were the blue boat and you were over the line during the last minute, you would have to do a turn around this mark and start again. Now, you don't have to wait till the gun goes off to do that. If you would recognize that, say you get in a heated battle with one of the boats and both of you kind of lose your heads and you or both of you end over the line and you know you're over the line and the 1 minute rule's in effect, you go to the closest end or whatever the most tactical end to go to and you can do your turnaround right then. And the same way if you're down here and you're over the line, you're either called or you know you're over the line, you do your turnaround and start back again. And it can absolutely be just disastrous in a large fleet, obviously. And so and the race committee boats, fleets, committees use it strictly to, if they have a very aggressive fleet, that's one way to slow them down. They can put that flag up on the first start. They can wait a couple of starts and then they lose their patience and up it goes. So keep your eye on that. And remember that if you're over the line, they don't have to hail you. But if you have a pretty good feel that you're over the line, you can go to the end and do your turn then. You don't have to wait till the start. Same way if you foul someone before the start, you can do your turns. You don't have to wait until after the start to do your turns. You can do them right then. And say 2 or 3 minutes before the start, do your turns if there's a penalty like that in effect and get going. We've pretty well covered the rules now, and we've had these very good starts. Now let's see what happens if we find we've had a bad start. So Matt, what do you do if you find that you're in that second or third row?
There's a couple different things. First of all, crew-wise and teamwork-wise on the boat, I try to talk as much as I can about what we're going to do, and then after the race, if we have a bad start, we made a bad move near or at the start, we try to talk about what we did wrong. And I think that we went through a phase, I'll just say 4 to 10 years ago, where we were getting a lot of bad starts, and it seems like, I'm sure nobody else has been in this position, where about 10 seconds after the start, if we were the white boat, it seemed like we were looking at the green boat off our jib wire within 10 or 20 seconds after the gun. And so I remember reading something in maybe it was an Elstrom book when I was growing up that said you should be over the line once every 7 starts. And I thought that that was one of the most ridiculous things I'd ever heard, because if you were in a major regatta, you would be over the line, once or twice. Well, actually, we've been able to perfect that we've taken that advice to heart, and we've become a little more aggressive in our starts. And I think that's, when I started this out talking about look back on your start and what went wrong, I'd almost say 9 times out of 10, unless you're over the line, it was because somebody else was more aggressive than you. Whether it was the surge of boats that would go over the top of you, or this leeward boat, in this case the green boat, that decided to pull the trigger or sheet in a little bit earlier than you and ended up on your lee bow, leaving you with no other choices and no chance to get a jump on the fleet. So it's, of course, very easy for me to sit up here and say, pull the trigger, pull your sheets in quicker and better than everybody else. Another hint of advice is that people, so rather than pulling in quicker, one thing that seems like a lot of fleets do the 15 seconds before the start is reach, because that is the quickest way to pick up speed. Reach, 20 or 30 degrees off the wind and then come up those last couple seconds. What you're really trying to do, you can sacrifice a little bit of full speed to go upwind those last 10 or 15 seconds and let this lured boat who's reaching off to get a lot of speed, it's better for this boat to be here than here. So going upwind, and I don't want to use the word pinching, but concentrating on pointing those last 15 seconds creates your own hole to leeward. We've found this to work very easily in the last couple years, and it's okay to be tight to the boats to weather as long as they're not in a position where they're blocking your wind. But you definitely want to make sure that in those last 20 seconds, the hole to leeward of you is as big as you can get it. So I would always look back after a start, and as tough as this is discussing, and other people giving you criticism, ask what you did wrong. And a lot of times it'll come that you just weren't aggressive enough, you didn't pull the trigger quick enough. But it's also good to try to squeeze and get a little bit of pointing action out of your boat without pinching in those 15 seconds to go to the gun so that you open up that hole. But it doesn't always work out that well. A lot of times you have a start where you are in the second row, where you are maybe even in the third or fourth row. It starts so bad that the oxygen masks are falling out of the boom. But there are several different ways to bail out of that start, and there are several totally different techniques to use. It's just, I don't want to say try it on your bad start, but I do want to try to give you some advice on what to look for. On the one that I was referring to a couple minutes ago, which is the most painful, when somebody's in your lee bow, there's a couple different things to do. There's two different types of bad starts. There's the bad start where the leeward boat has squeezed out on you a little bit earlier, and slowly during that first minute after the start, they slowly work out on you, and they're going to make you not go as fast as you'd like to go. That start, and again, we always throw in this caveat that you have to make sure that these compass readings that we worked on a few minutes ago to get before the start, that you are on the correct tack anyway. But you want to hang in there as long as you can so that you stay as much on that first row as we were talking about several minutes ago, where if you watch a start, the first row and the second row separate dramatically. You want to be as much on that first row as you can. And if that means that maybe this green boat's going to squeeze out just a little bit, you want to hang in there, as we said, as long as you can. Try not to get down into the wake. And again, this is a time to try to point without pinching. And pointing doesn't mean luffing the jib. It doesn't mean heeling the boat. But you look at your tuning guide, talk to your local experts and see what they do to point. You want to make sure you have some speed before you try to do that, but you just want to be able to hang in there. There's a lot of people who can stay in this position a lot longer than others, and it takes good practice. When my father and I brush in lightnings, we'll actually try to let one boat get in a lee bow position and just try to steer there for a while. It's very difficult to steer with somebody in your jib window or in front of your jib wire. But that is one of the better pieces of advice that I can give you for getting a bad start. And that's hanging there as long as you can, as long as you have close to the boat speed of everybody else. Then what you don't want to be is one of the first boats over to tack, because if you're in the middle of the line, there will be no place to go except beyond the entire fleet. And what expression we've used for a long time, people like to talk about them, is blockers. Somebody else who's actually gotten a worse start than you tacks, and assuming they cross you, they still have cleared out a spot for you later down the way. They come up to this group of this red and blue boat, and this green boat tacks below them, and he'll actually either slow them down or somehow clear out a spot to make it very clear what you have to do. That doesn't mean that you'll always be able to cross if a blocker makes a hole for you, but it just means that the fleet will sort itself out. Again, if you followed a fleet in a power boat after a 25 boat fleet started, you would just still be amazed at how the fleet spreads out. A minute after the start, there's all kinds of room back here. That's why you want to wait for a minute after that start, where there's more room to take this port over. Another thing, though, if you have a bad start, let's say you're in here, is one of the advantages of having a bad start is that you get to choose which tack that you're on. These people can't choose. These people in the front row, they have to stay on starboard tack. And all joking aside, there's a 50% chance that starboard is not the favored tack from the compass readings that you're able to get before the start. That starboard might be down 10 degrees. In our last race of our national championships this year, we had a start that looked like this, and again, we were the white boat. We were down 15 degrees on the compass. We tacked, and we're taking people's transoms. Everybody, 30 of the 35 boats stayed on starboard tack. We were up 15 degrees for probably a minute, and we had probably the 30th worst start. Went out here, stayed in phase. We had a little bit of bad air as we dipped these people, but came back on starboard after a minute when the wind phased in and we were back into the race. So again, that is one of the reasons to keep an eye on your compass and to know at the gun whether you're on a lifted tack or not a lifted tack. But again, those are when you have a start that somebody's on your lee bow, you want to hang in there as long as you can and wait for things to open up. And if you have a start one more time where boats truly are grinding over the top of you, that might be a time to tack and get out of there, because if you're in this position, nobody can steer when you have wind being blocked by one or more boats. So then you do want to bail out and get out of there as quick as you can. But more than anything else, you want to try to make sure that you try to keep your boat speed, your boat moving. And there's a lot of tendency to try to tack too much, to try to do things you wouldn't normally do if you're in open water. But you really want to try to keep your boat speed as best you can and try to keep up with that front row.
Good. Okay, we're going to start going upwind now. That covers the rules and tactics before the start, basically, but that gives you something to think about and study. So now let's start going upwind. And we're going to pick up some new definitions, and there's going to be some changes in this luffing rule. And now let's get our definition of when we have an overlap and when we don't, because now it's going to become more and more important to understand what we mean. Leeward boat, weather boat, no question, there's an overlap here. The overlap runs as a line running perpendicular to the center line of the boat. You could say it's actually coming off the most aftermost point of the boat. So it's not just the transom. If you have a rudder sticking out there, that's the most after point. But it's a line perpendicular to the center line of the boat. And as that changes is whether or not you still have an overlap as far as the leeward boat is concerned. So now, if this weather boat would change to a course here, as far as you look this way, it appears that they're still overlapped. But you take a line off that transom, and no longer does he have an overlap. And take that the other way. Well, that's really not a good, put it farther ahead. His perpendicular line picks up this boat where actually it looks like there's space in there because it's the line perpendicular to the center line. Okay, so that's overlap. We're going to be hitting overlap quite a bit, particularly when we start going around marks. Now, we're going to lose close hauled insofar as the restriction on the leeward boat, and we're going to pick up a new one, and that's proper course. And proper course is the course that a boat would sail if we were not affected by the other boats around it. Doesn't mean that you're going to sail a course straight to the next mark or that you're going to sail in one direction or another. It depends on the wind, the conditions, whether you're close to a shoreline, And everybody has their own idea what is considered their proper course. Just look at boats coming downwind. You see these pictures with the spinnakers up. They could be a half a mile apart. And the leeward boat thinks he's on the proper course. The weather boat thinks he's on the proper course. But the thing we have to remember, again, basic rule, starboard and port, windward, leeward, the leeward boat is the one that determines the proper course. And there's only going to be one place where we'll mention the proper course of the weather boat when it comes to playing the rules. The leeward boat determines where it's going to go. So forget about the close-hauled course, and now they clear the line, and let's say that the first leg is now turned into somewhat of a reach, and the blue boat comes from the stern and places an overlap to leeward of the red boat. Now, that would not be an overlap. That would be an overlap. But let's have them sail on parallel courses. Blue boat now has an overlap to leeward. What rights has it picked up? The rights it's picked up is it might, for some whatever reason it might be, it sees some wind that seems to be backing up it or going more to head them. It might be a shoreline that it wants to get away from over here. And it could be just exactly contrary to what the weather boat wants to do. The weather boat has to follow its course, its proper course. There is no defense for the weather boat to hail back, I'm on my proper course. That doesn't mean anything. It's the leeward boat that determines proper course in this situation. And that's what it can do. It can take that weather boat up to the leeward boat's proper course. Now, it has to keep in mind, and we're going to hit this all the way through the rules, once it establishes that overlap to leeward, it has to allow that weather boat now to assume its new obligation to keep clear. And that doesn't mean we're not talking about a lot of seconds, but there is a time period in there where you have to let this boat assume this new responsibility it has. Once you do that, then whether a hail is required or not, there is not. Whether it's good sailing to do it, I'll leave that up to the leeward boat, but the weather boat should immediately understand that it has this responsibility to stay out of that leeward boat's way. Now, let's reverse this. The weather boat overtakes the leeward boat to weather. Now, what rights does the leeward boat have? All right, we defined mast line. And let's make sure we understand what that is again. It's when the weather boat skipper sitting in his normal tiller position, and why I keep saying that, you can't run 2 or 3 feet forward just for the moment to establish your tiller position. You're in a normal tiller position. Now, it's going to be different than it was before the start because we're going to add some things on this thing. One, not sailing a course higher than the leeward boat. And remember, before the start, we said if it wanted to maintain a mast line, it actually could sail farther to weather. Not once you clear the line. Now that he can only sail, the weather boat can only sail a course no higher than the leeward boat to hail a mast line. Hails mast line. Now, this boat then is required to do what? Go back to its proper course. So this red boat, assume that it's moving very well, much better than the leeward boat. Right at this point, the leeward boat could actually take this weather boat head to wind if it wished. Because why? This boat does not have mast line on it, and therefore it can take it head to wind until it does get mast line. All right, now, supposing, again, this red boat is moving very well, comes up and establishes mast line, is not sailing any higher than the blue boat, the leeward boat, and hails mast line. Now the blue boat goes back to its proper course, and the red boat may continue on higher and may go back again. Now, supposing, as before the start, the leeward boat breaks the mast line position again. Before the start, we said he could immediately do another tactical luff and take the weather boat head to wind if it wanted to go that high. Can he do it in this situation? No. Again, you have to distinguish before the start and after the start. In this situation, Once mast line's established in this overlap position, the leeward boat does not get luffing rights again until it either sails clear ahead, sails 2 boat lengths down, or tacks or jibes. So in this situation here, once this red boat has established mast line, this boat is restricted to its proper course until it either sails clear ahead or sails 2 boat lengths apart. Or if you were going, when this jibe would come into in this situation, is if you were sailing dead downwind, that it could jibe and jibe back, and we'll get into that tactic when we're going dead downwind. Okay, now one other thing on mast line and this luffing rule is if there is a question on mast line, the leeward boat can't continue with a tactical luff. Once the weather boat hails mast line, the only thing the leeward boat can do is lay down to its proper course and protest. They cannot get in a hassle on this thing, and the leeward boat can't yell, oh, you don't have mast line on me yet, you're premature, whatever it is. He just bears off and protests. Okay, any questions? Okay. We're going to be hitting overlap situations and that luffing rule throughout the other 2 legs. Now, we're going upwind. We're going to run into immediately starboard and port. And we know that the starboard tack boat has right of way on the port tack boat as they approach each other. Now, what rights does the port tack boat have, if you want to talk about rights of a port tack? Because we know that the starboard tack boat has a right of way. Supposing when they're about 2 boat lengths apart, there is a very radical wind shift that would lift the starboard tack boat up on the wind. And the port tack boat now can no longer clear, where before that wind shift it was going to be able to clear. The starboard tack boat cannot take that wind shift in a way that would keep that boat from keeping clear if the starboard tack recognizes that prior to that shift there was not going to be any question but the port tack was going to clear. It cannot mislead that port tack boat. It cannot take that. Now, Matt's going to discuss the practicality of that, but that is the rule. It's a very critical time for boats on the weather leg. In my opinion, there's probably as many protests in this situation as any that you'll hit on a race course. And I think we ought to get some practical side to it. But obviously the port tack boat has the option of laying off and going under, or has the option of tacking underneath. There's no problem, lays off and goes under. So long as the starboard boat doesn't mislead it by laying off, there's no question it's going to be able to go off. The starboard tack boat can't lay off to keep from doing that. Now, supposing that the port tack boat wants to tack to leeward, what problems does it have there? Well, it's going to go from a situation from being the burden boat to being the right-of-way boat. But to do that, it has to be careful when it comes around. And we used to talk about sails being full when the main sail became full. That's no longer the rule. The rule is whether or not the boat has gone onto its close-hauled course on starboard tack. The sail still might be luffing, but so long as it got the boat around on this course before this boat was forced to luff to avoid collision, there was no foul. So the port tack boat is approaching the starboard tack boat, realizes it can't clear, wants to tack underneath, pulls its boat around on the starboard tack, and starboard tack boat goes on. Tactically, whether that's the thing you should do, we're going to find out in a minute. But now, supposing that it tacks farther up in front of the starboard tack boat, gets around on the close-hauled course, and during that time of the tack, Now let's talk about tacking just for the moment. Tacking is from the time that you are head to wind till you fill away on your new course. That's the definition of tacking. So, for example, the port tack boat's on port tack here. Once it goes head to wind, it's still on port tack. It's tacking from going from head to wind to where it's now on a close hauled course. During that period of time, while it's in the process of tacking, it has no right-of-way on a boat that's on a tack. So it's totally vulnerable right there. If in the process of changing from port tack going around to this close hauled course on starboard, the starboard tack boat has to luff, the port tack boat is fouled. But supposing it tacks farther in front of the boat, gets around on its close hauled course, and now because of the way that the starboard tack boat had, maybe 3 seconds after it's now on close hauled course, the starboard tack boat has to luff up. Is there a foul? No. Now, this would be somewhat colored, however, if there were a lot of sea, a lot of breeze, and maybe that same thing could happen, but because of the seas, the starboard tack boat could not keep from coming down onto the port tack after it tacked on the starboard, from coming down on its starboard side because of the conditions. Then the port tack boat, when it tacked, did foul it, but you'd have to have those extreme conditions. But otherwise, just as I explained it, is the rule. And I think there is this misunderstanding that if the starboard tack boat has to do anything to avoid collision, the port tack boat is fouled. That's not the case. It takes place during the tacking maneuver of the port tack boat. Matt, talk about tactically now as far as starboard and port, and when would you tack under somebody and when would you not?
Okay, going back a few minutes, game plan that we talked about before the start, we never approached the race unless it's in very extreme circumstances where there's a storm or current or something like that, where we say we're going to go to the right side on this beat or we're going to go to the left side. That's just not the way we sail. We sail to stay on a lift or to sail for velocity. So keeping that in mind, the way that we approach a two-boat incident is going to be significantly different than in the middle of the course than what you would have when you get near a mark. So I'm going to trade back and forth here as far as which boat that we are. Let's say we've just started a few minutes ago. We had this great start because we left up the boats to weather of us and we worked into our hole and we got going at full speed. We've been going out on a lift on starboard tack for a while. We tack over to port tack because we got headed, and we're, if I can put a theme into this, every time you're heading a particular direction upwind, you know why you're going that direction. You're going there because you are on a lift or because you're on your normal tack and you see more breeze on that side. But every shot you take, so to speak, during the race, there is a reason why you're doing that. So you tack back to port because the wind might have gone a little bit more your side. You also felt yourself getting a little bit too far out to the left-hand side of the course. Now here comes this green boat, starboard tacker. You're on port, and you have two decisions. You actually have three decisions. You know that you can't cross them, so that eliminates that choice. If you tack back to starboard, then you've gone from what was a lifted port tack back onto a headed starboard tack. Depending on what your situation is with boats below you, you're not losing that much if you dip this boat. Assuming that you couldn't cross them, and our boats are about 18 feet long, the most you're going to lose is approximately 15 feet. That 15 feet is not worth redirecting the tactics that you've planned out to stay on a lifted tack. You don't need to try to guess necessarily why this boat is on starboard tack because you're convinced that what you're doing is the right thing. So I think a lot of times we either try to push it or we tack on to starboard at the last minute because we thought we could cross or because we really didn't know which direction we want to go. Again, it sounds like we're emphasizing compass and being on the lifted tack too often here, but every time you make a maneuver upwind, you want to, if you want to go back. Now, let's say you've You've been headed on port. This green boat's actually come up in the last 30 seconds or so. Now you're down. Maybe that would be a good time to tack in front. But you have a reason for doing that. So any maneuver you make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons long term in the course. Again, what you would do in the middle of the beat would be significantly different than what we would do at the weather mark, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Right now I'm just trying to apply situations for being in the middle of the weather leg. Well, my dad just talked about a couple minutes ago that if you're crossing the starboard tack boat and a lift comes in for the starboard tack boat and the port tack hits a header, I would not want to go into the protest room with that incident being the port tack boat. I think that there's usually a 50-50 chance whenever you go in the protest room, but I think that it's heavily weighted at 50% in the starboard tacker's favor, and it's just not worth it to try to say that the starboard tacker got a header. If it's going to be that close, you're only losing 15 or so feet by dipping them. So that is what we would do on port tack. Again, sometimes this has changed so much that the port tacker almost has more control in this situation, as long as you're not worried about that 15 feet as the starboard tacker, because the port tacker can tack or dip. Once you get into this close proximity, the starboard tacker really can't keep the port tacker from tacking. Now, a lot of us will say, if you're the starboard, now we're going to switch over here and I'm going to act like we're the starboard tack boat. You've done all your maneuvers this weather leg for a reason also. You feel you're on the lifted tack and you want to continue on starboard, but you think that this red boat's going to tack in front of you on starboard because he or she has read the same lift that you had as a header on port tack, and so they're going to end up tacking in front of you. You can yell, don't tack, go ahead, I'll dip you, and lay way down, but that port tack boat has no obligation, and sometimes that communication is made so forcefully that it's communicated to the starboard tack boat as it's, you have to, you are obliged to tell me what to do. There is absolutely no response that is necessary. You can just continue on your tack with no response, and hopefully the red boat will get the communication that you want him to tack, or you want him to, you're not going to lay off and go below them. So, but like I was saying, the port tack boat actually has more control because it's very difficult, unless you are very convincing, to get that port tack boat to go ahead and cross if you want to continue on your starboard tack. But again, to summarize, it's really not worth it in the middle of the leg. Now, in a couple minutes, when we get closer to the weather mark, one-on-one situations are significantly more critical as far as where you position your boat. But when you're the red boat and you tack below that situation, you better want to go to the left-hand side of the course. If you were the starboard tack boat and you wanted to continue to go to the left-hand side, you should try to let the port tack boat know that you can go ahead and cross. Again, they're under no obligation to do that. But what you want to do, in neither boat really, should have the other boat try to dictate their course for them. So that's what you do in the middle of the race course. As we move up the weather leg a little bit more, it might be a little bit different.
And as Matt mentioned, you hear more and more in these fleets, a port tack boat approaching a starboard tack boat will hail tack or cross, like they're putting a burden on the starboard tack boat. And as we just said, if the starboard boat says nothing, the port tack boat has to do whatever it has to do to stay clear. But many times the starboard tack boat will say, go across, because again, they don't want this to happen. They're just as satisfied that they're on the right course as the port tack boat is, so the port tack boat might be very happy to go on, and the starboard tack boat is happy to do what it's doing. Okay, now, we have another situation. Supposing that you're going towards a shoreline, and most of our sailing are on lakes or rivers. What happens here? The red boat is beginning to run out of the depth of water that it needs to continue on. It has the right to hail the boat to its weather if it cannot tack and pass under it safely. So in this situation, the leeward boat can hail the starboard tack boat to tack. And that isn't a conversational piece there. I'm getting close. I think we ought to You actually have to come out with a solid hail, room to tack. In that situation, that puts a burden on the weather boat to tack. That immediately then puts a burden on the boat that was to lure that's going to accept that fact that the weather boat tacked, and it must initiate its tack before this boat completes its tack. And we just discussed tacking is from head to wind to where you get around in your close-hauled course. That doesn't take very long. So if this boat hails, it better be prepared to tack. And what it can't do is continue on up the course to clean its air up and come over here. And you want to be very careful. If you're the weather boat, you might even suggest to that boat that he tack. As he hails, you say, you tack before I complete my tack. Just remind him that you know the rule. Because that's abused. I think a lot of times people will continue to hold their tack after they hail to clear their air. Same thing would happen over here. And we now pick up another rule simultaneously. But let's cover this. If this is in the same situation, and this boat cannot get around its starboard tack in time to give this boat time to tack, it could hail it around, and the burden just shifts. The weather boat, this situation, even though it's on port tack, has the responsibility of tacking. This boat must tack before it completes its tack. It must initiate its tack. Yes, Tom?
If the boat does not, can he file a protest against him for not tacking soon enough?
This boat against this boat?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a mandatory rule right there. I mean, it's mandatory to the lured boat to tack before the weather boat completes its tack. Now, let's just spread these out a little bit further. If this boat can complete its tack on the starboard, and then this boat can take action either to tack or pass under, then this boat doesn't have to worry about the hail. And that even then applies, let's take it away from the shoreline, and now this boat wants to tack. Let's close this up again. Just because it's coming on a starboard tack does not give it any right-of-way. It would have had to complete its tack and give this boat time then to assume this obligation, either to tack or to pass under. But if they have a problem where they come together, just because this boat hailed here and said, I'm coming on the starboard tack, that doesn't obligate the weather boat at all. All that does is tell this boat that he's going to tack, but this boat better make certain that it gets around its close-hauled course, and this boat now has its time to respond to that. Any questions on that? Now, we just discussed the definition of obstruction, and let me just read it again because we want to understand. An obstruction is any object, including a vessel underway, large enough to require a yacht when more than one overall length away from it to make a substantial alteration of course to pass on one side or the other, including a buoy when the yacht in question cannot safely pass between it and a shoal or objects that it marks. And as I mentioned before the start, we have the situation with the race committee boat. Dave Perry uses the example. In his opinion, if you make a 10-degree turn to avoid a obstruction, when you're one boat length away from it, that's enough to make it an obstruction. So if you had a 20-foot boat, and 10 degrees would be about a 3.5-foot change either way, that comes down to 7 feet would be an obstruction for a 20-foot boat. But anyway, now we have a right-of-way boat, and you're approaching this, you're the weather of the white boat. Now, what are the responsibilities of different boats? First of all, this boat has no worry so long as it doesn't mislead these boats as to what it's going to do. It can't lay off, obviously. It can't do any goofy things, but it can certainly hold its course and not worry about anything. This boat obligation now is to the lured boat. It has an obligation ultimately to the starboard tack boat, but its obligation is to the lured boat. The lured boat, if it elects to pass under the starboard tack boat and they are overlapped, lured and windward yacht, then it must give the windward boat room to pass under also. This sometimes can cause some real serious situation, obviously, but I think this is sometimes abused. On the other hand, it can, if it wants to tack, it can hail this boat to tack, and it's just as if you're on a shoreline. This boat must tack, and then this boat must start its tack before it completes its tack. Now, if they're far enough back, and there's still a good reason for this boat to hail, if this boat can clear this boat, this is a mandatory hail, room to tack. Mandatory hail back is to affect you tack, which means I can keep clear of you. So this red boat's positive, it can keep clear of the leeward boat. The leeward boat tacks, and it comes up here, it can tack underneath the starboard tack boat. Obviously, still has to recognize it right away in the starboard tack boat, but its initial obligation is to the leeward boat, and if it can clear it, all it hails back is you tack. When we get to a weather mark, we're going to get mad up here and see this really takes on an entirely different hue than just what I said there. And I think this rule, again, is abused, and we'll talk about the abuse of it as we get close to a weather mark, because you do hit it in the middle of the course, but it shouldn't be the problem it's going to be when we go around a weather mark. Okay. Now let's start approaching a weather mark. And are there any questions so far? Yeah,
Can
Jeff.
UTAC responds also be used when you're coming up against the shoreline?
Yes, yeah, good point, Jeff. Going back here again, if the white boat is positive, it can clear this boat in this situation, or the same way in this situation, the blue boat, sure, it can clear the red boat. It can hail back upon hearing that hail, room to tack, I'm running out of water or whatever, you tack. This boat tacks, it clears it, there's no problem. Okay. Now, going into a weather mark, we have to be very careful how we say this. First of all, let's get some things understood here. Going around a weather mark or a leeward mark, we have an imaginary 2 boat length circle. If this were 2 boat lengths around here, all the way around. And at the weather mark, as well as the leeward mark, as we'll see, if 2 boats are on the same tack, and the one boat reaches the leeward boat in this situation, the inside boat reaches the 2 boat length circle here, it now has room to go around that mark. Now that's easy. Let's put it this way, and let's say we've got somebody like Matt was talking about that can really sail very well, and in spite of the dirty air it might be getting, that might be a little bit too good. But right there, he's able to hold that. He can still claim room between the white boat and the weather boat. And I think sometimes we get confused on that because we're going to shift now, which is going to make a distinction between weather marks and leeward marks. And that is now they're coming in on opposite tacks. And there's no question the white boat, the port tack boat's going to get there first. That doesn't mean a thing. It's whether or not that port tack boat can get around that mark, get around its tack without fouling the boat on starboard tack, and ultimately perhaps get around the mark, then there's no problem. But the mark does not give it any right-of-way. Its problem is the fact it's on port tack, and as we discussed further down in the course, it's got to be able to get around that mark, get around that tack without fouling the starboard tack boat. And it completes its tack before the starboard tack boat has to avoid collision. So that we're going to find is different than rounding a leeward mark. Starboard and port tack does apply. You just, in effect, take the mark out of there, and can the port tack boat complete its tack without fouling its boat? But we say on the same tack, it's the same rules that apply. If on the same tack, the inside boat when it hits the two-boat length circle, whichever, if the, the weather boat here hits a two-boat length circle, the inside boat then has right-of-way. And even though at this point it has overlap, now this boat pulls ahead, it still maintains that. Once it had the overlap at the two-boat length circle, it maintains that throughout the rounding. There's been one twist to this in the recent years in the rules, and that is, let's take this situation. We know what happens here. We just went through that. Supposing the white boat comes up here and tacks inside here, because we know that inside this boat, two-boat length circle, you can tack to maintain a right-of-way going around a mark. So there's the rule actually covers that. You can tack inside the two-boat length circle, and so long as you don't foul the starboard tack boat, you can pick up your right-of-way between that two-boat length imaginary line and go around. Supposing that inside that two-boat length circle, this port tack boat is able to clear the starboard tack boat, tacks up in here. Now, what obligation does the starboard tack boat have? The rule is that if it can clear the boat that just tacked on the starboard tack's transom, there is no foul. If it cannot clear and has to come up in here, then the boat that just tacked on the starboard must give it room. Any questions on that?
If there's a slight overlap by the leeward boat, and you can slightly luff up to break that overlap, would that be something you do at the tube and then fall back off?
If you could, I think it's just saying, Lou, if you can do that, if you can avoid that by going past its transom, that's what you should do.
Well, I was thinking of the other situation, George. The standard situation, you're both coming in on starboard, and the lead boat, you know, at the two boat length circle. If there's a slight overlap, can you, as that lead boat, head up enough, therefore changing that angle, say at that point no overlap, and then fall back off, and you've
yes. The question is here, because we went through what an overlap is. Remember, we said no overlap, overlap, and so forth. Now, the question is, just before they hit the two-boat length circle, if the green boat luffs up sharply enough so that as it hits the two-boat length circle, it breaks, there is no overlap. That's right, it can keep that. That's very difficult to do going around a weather mark, and it's very common to do going around a leeward mark, and we'll get into that. And that's used very much. But I rarely see it. I asked Matt here, but I rarely see that at a weather mark. But you've got a good grasp of the rule, that's for sure. Okay, that's the rules that apply going around a weather mark. Matt, what would you want to discuss tactically in the use of those rules?
Well, first of all, just stepping back maybe 1/4 of the way from the weather mark, you're 3/4 of the way up the beat. One of the reasons we've kept good track of our compasses, we're sailing on lifts all the way, but one of the things that I showed on what a wind shift can do to you, and one of the reasons we want to stay away from ley lines, is what happens when you overstand a mark. Here's a mark. Here are the ley lines for that mark. If you're out here...
Can you define ley lines?
I'm sorry. Ley line would be the course on your close-hauled course that you'd be sailing, and you would be aiming right at the mark. On the port tack ley line, it would be this line here. On the starboard tack ley line, you're on starboard tack and you're fetching, or you're aiming towards that weather mark. If you're out here and the wind shifts 10 degrees to the right, like I was trying to draw before, your course is really like that, and you've wasted this distance in here. Now, you would steer down towards it, but if you're sailing a lot of the boats that we sail, your boat speed isn't going to pick up that much, and you've basically lost that much distance. So, rule number one, not yachting rule number one, but rule of caution is to stay away from the ley lines when you're, 1/4 of the way from the mark. The other thing that people have a tendency to do is the starboard tack ley line tends to stack up. in a similar way that I was talking about at the starting line, you know, I actually do enjoy watching races sometimes. If you watch boats around a weather mark, because all these boats are on the starboard tack ley line and they're trying to go around this mark, they're going to be doing all different types of bad things to their boats to try to pinch or point high and go slower than if you're sailing free, forgetting any wind shifts at all, just sailing out here with your boat going the correct angle to the wind and coming in on the port tack ley line or near it. And again, I'm not talking about a quarter the distance of the beat from the mark. I'm talking about 5 or so boat lengths from the mark. And the reason this works by coming out to the port ley line and finding a hole in here to tack into is because the starboard tack ley lines stack up and everybody tends to go very slowly. It's safe out there because here you are taking a little bit of risk and hoping that there's a hole. But on starboard you're on the tack that has the rights, but you're going very slow traditionally in big fleets, bigger than 10 or 12 boats or something like that when people are bunched together. So that's kind of standard guidelines here. Stay away from the ley lines, stay away from the starboard ley line in the last 5 or 10 boat lengths, and you'll always gain a being better speed when you're coming out on the port hand side. One other thing when I was talking about the way that you would approach 2 boats or 3 boats near each other in the middle of the race course compared to the weather mark situation is being pinned like this. And on the white boat's part, if you're in the middle of the weather leg, this is a horrible position to be in. If you're near the weather mark, this is actually the best place to be in, assuming that you would be able to tack that. This is safe because you will be able to hang on long enough to this red boat on your lee bow. At the starting line or in the middle of the weather leg, this would be deadly. You wouldn't be able to hang in here for more than 30 seconds. But that's about the 30 seconds is all you need to lock somebody up to be on the favored inside to be able to go around the mark ahead of the red boat. So without getting into too many of the details, locking people up on one side or the other is a much better idea and is a good aggressive tactic as you get closer to the weather mark. In the middle of the weather leg, it's not such a good idea. So when 2 boats are approaching each other in this position, the starboard ley line is out here and you're the red boat. Obviously, you would want to dip this white boat because you don't want to get locked out to the left-hand side and get carried on past the weather mark till the white boat tacks and you're in that white boat's transom. If you're the white boat and this red boat is on port tack and dips you like this, you're able to tack here, and normally in the middle of the weather leg you wouldn't be able to get away with this tactic because soon this red boat will be in front of your jib window, but you'll be able to hang on as you get these aggressive tactics in place. You're able to hang on when you're closer to the weather mark until you at least get out to the ley line, then you're in the controlling position. So just the rule of thumb is you can get away with being closer to the weather mark to each boat than you would if you're in the middle of the leg.
Do you have any particular general philosophy on shorelines, on rivers or lakes? How do you approach those?
I'm sorry, how do you mean?
Well, I mean, what do you think about when you're approaching a shoreline, or either whether river or lake or whatever?
Well, if it's a shoreline and you're in a lake that has no current, I think that there would be a tendency on our part to try to stay away from the shoreline as you get near a mark, because a lot of times weather marks might be set very close to trees and next to the shoreline, and it's good to stay out in the lake as long as you can and come into the weather mark near the end. Is that not what you meant? Or I think that a lot of times in the lakes we sail in, to get as much length in the weather leg as they can, race committees will set that pin anchored onto some of the roots of the largest trees on the shoreline. And I think it is always good, and I think in small lakes you can always go out there and really scope out where that mark is, and there might be one side that has velocity to it that the other side doesn't. So I think that's something always to try to keep in mind.
Well, I was kind of liking a shoreline to almost like going to a ley line, because you know, the problem with a shoreline is once you go there, you've eliminated your alternatives. All you can do is come out, and you've got to come out. You can't go back in again if you get knocked. And I think, as you see, Matt's approach to a weather leg is keeping your options open. As you notice, everything he's doing, he's got himself in a situation that it doesn't look good one way, you can go back another way. And when you get yourself either to a ley line or to a shoreline or locked up, where you lose your ability to do the best thing to do that you want to do in your overall approach to a weather leg, you've lost something. Okay, let's go around the weather mark now. First time we're going to pick up something about a weather boat's proper course. And I think it's the only time you'll hear someone being able to hail proper course. And what brings this about? If you've rounded a weather mark and you're the boat that's in the lead, and there's a boat within 3 boat lengths from you steering a course to pass you to leeward, you as the weather boat cannot sail below your proper course. So you cannot lay off with that boat below your proper course if you think that's a pretty good maneuver, but you wouldn't do it if he weren't there. Then you're not sailing your proper course. So, but on the other hand, supposing there is a puff that comes through, and most of the time, one of the things we're thinking about going downwind, as a puff comes in, we lay off, and when it lets up, we come back up again. You just don't steer straight down a leeward course most of the time. You're playing the puffs, laying off, coming back in the light spots. And so you might hit this situation where you've got this blast and you want to ride it down just like he is, or the boat behind you is. And so you lay down. And about this time, he knows the rule, so he hails to you. You're laying off of me, and I'm within 3 boat lengths. Your hail back to him as the weather boat would be, I'm on my proper course. That's the only time. Any other time, if you're overlapped with the leeward boat and you're the weather boat, your proper course doesn't mean a thing. It's his proper course. All you can do as weather boat is claim that he's not on his proper course. That's different. But that's your claim. Not that you're on the proper course. He's not on his proper course. But in this situation, your defense to this 3 boat length situation where a boat is steering to pass you to leeward, and he hails you that you're laying off on him, your hail back is, if that's the fact, of course, that I am sailing my proper course. Okay, now we're going dead downwind or on a reach, whatever. Got to keep in mind starboard and port. Basic rule. Hasn't changed at all. And we've already been through what happens if you put a overlap to leeward. The leeward boat sails its proper course, can make the weather boat go up if it wants to. Breaks the mast line, can't do anything until it sails clear ahead or sails 2 boat lengths apart, then comes back in again and reestablishes that overlap. If it passes to weather, we know that the leeward boat can take this weather boat head to wind if it wants to until the weather boat gets mast line position. And keep in mind that the weather boat can never sail a course higher than the leeward boat to establish this mast line position. Once it establishes that, there's no defense to the leeward boat if he doesn't think there has been a mast line established. All he can do is lay off and hail. But just keep in mind again that that until that time, it can do this tactical up until it's hailed a mast line. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Can I just add in a couple things?
Sure.
Just while we're talking about these boats on this reaching leg, a couple things. We've rounded the weather mark. With the way that courses are set, with the wind coming in from behind, it is not difficult for the blue boat to appear to be faster. But again, what I want to try to communicate is there's a difference between the way that you would approach the early to middle part of the leg compared to what you would start thinking if you're the blue boat as you get closer to the mark. Legally, etc., you have rights to go down here, and the white boat cannot lay below its proper course as you try to pass. But if you've just rounded the weather mark and you're here, this is not a very safe position for you to be in. That's not a smart spot to put your boat in that early in the leg. People who just rounded the weather mark behind you can start stacking up above you and blocking the breeze that you're trying to get to pass this individual. So again, a lot of times our courses between a weather mark and a jibe mark will be something like higher up here to protect ourselves, and then as we get to the middle of the leg, start dropping down to get room. So as we get down within 15 boat lengths of that leeward at the jibe mark, it is not such a bad idea now to try to steer below, because you're never going to make it all the way through. I guess that's the point maybe I didn't follow all the way through with. No matter how fast you are in normal conditions, if you're on any type of reach, the blue boat's never going to pass the white boat all the way through. All you're going to do is get locked up down here, and who knows what will happen to you if you get in that position early in the leg. When you get within a position where you can go to a point and stay there long enough to get overlap at the mark, which we'll get into in a couple minutes, that's a different deal. All I'm trying to tell you is the difference in how you think about approaching these boats near the weather mark in the middle of the leg compared to at the jibe mark. On the same hand, if you don't, if you're going to try to pass the boat in front of you, you're not going to do it by being here. This boat has all the rights in the world. You never want to put your bow right next to the transom of the leeward boat, because that's a sure way of getting yourself knocked out. If you can truly pass a boat, get up high enough so that boat can't come up to you. So there's really only one place for you to be if you truly think you're faster. If you want to keep yourself on line to the course, you stay right behind the boat. So.
Good. Okay, going downwind, if you're the leeward boat and there's a number of boats to your weather, you can luff all of those boats as long as you have tactical luffing rights. That is, there's no boat that has mast line on you. You can luff all of them on a tactical luff, up to head of wind if you wish, even though the other boats might be in a position where, for example, in this situation, the white boat does have mast line on the blue boat, and ordinarily the blue boat can only take the white boat up to the blue boat's proper course. All these boats must respond, and so the blue boat can force the white boat to respond to its luff because you're forcing it up. That happens more often than what you would think. Going into a leeward mark, keeping in mind now again what we discussed here on this imaginary 2 boat length circle line. If when the leading boat or the boat that's involved in an overlap reaches that 2 boat length circle, if another boat has an overlap on it, it must give it room to make a round. And the room it must give is for that inside boat to make a seamanship round, not a tactical round. So in this situation, the blue boat, because it has an overlap, cannot force the red boat way outside, so it can come around close on the mark when it finishes its round. As you know, if no boats around, there's usually a good way to round a mark, and most of the time, say in this situation, if you're going back upwind, of course this is a jibe mark, but you would want to take it wide here and cut it close here. If you have room on a boat, the only room you have is to make a seamanship type round, not a tactical round. Okay, and now again, if once you have that overlap and it's broken before the boat that you put an overlap on gets to the mark, it still must give you room to round.
George?
Yes?
The red boat has to give the blue boat not only room to go around the mark, but also to finish its jibe, correct?
Yes, with the boom.
If
Right.
the long boom goes out there, the red boat has to make sure that it'll be out of the way of that boom when it's done jibing.
Absolutely, good point. Good point. Yeah. Now, let's just talk onus for a moment and get this out of the way. If 2 boats, and you always have these hassles every so often where you may or may not have an overlap. If you're the blue boat, you have it, and it's broken, and you have it, and you're broken. If you've had it, and just as the outside boat reaches a 2 boat length circle, it claims that it broke the overlap. If there is a protest in that situation, it has the onus of proving to the race committee that it followed the rule. And it's not just its word against your word. The onus is, that is, they have this obligation now to prove to the protest committee that they followed that rule. It's a big difference. And many times, and you ought to serve on protest committees every chance you get, just get the flavor of doing it. You will really rely very heavily on this onus rule. So in that situation, the fact that this boat, outside boat, is claiming that it broke it, even though it was overlapped before, it has the onus. On the other hand, if there were no overlap prior to reaching that 2-boat length circle, but just as the outside boat reached that 2-boat length circle, the inside boat claimed that it got an overlap, then in that situation, the onus switches back to the inside boat to prove that it did follow the rule and it did get it. And onuses are very important to understand. And we'll go over those at the end. Now, if there are a number of boats here, and they're all on starboard tack, and it's going to be a jibe, in this situation, because the red boat has luffing rights on all those boats, if it has, for some reason, a bad jibe, supposing the spinnaker gets stuck or something, it just can't jibe, it can carry those boats on past the mark. That's not a good tactical maneuver most of the time, but it's just something to keep in mind. If you're in that situation, you're not obligated to make that turn. But on the other hand, if you don't have luffing rights, but now you just have a proper course right away here, then you must make that turn, even though your spinnaker's all over your boat and you're having a very difficult time jibing. And again, if one of these boats, if they're on opposite tacks, then in that situation, you must go around the mark and assume your proper course to the next mark. Something to remember.
Okay, for a minute, I'm going to assume that this is the jibe mark, and we've rounded marks to port, and we're heading to turn to another mark down here. If you think about it, the jibe mark, because of the nature of what my dad was just saying, the most can be won or lost at jibe mark probably than any mark out on the course because of this nature of boats to stack up. If you think about it, that happens on the ley line for the weather leg, but not nearly the distance out that at that 2-boat length circle you can lose lots of distance if you have yourself caught out here. And if you think about the leeward mark, because of the nature of the way that people line up, it doesn't lend itself to this, as we used to say, the cartwheel effect. So we approach the jibe mark as aggressively as any mark out on the course in an effort to try to get an overlap on the inside. And so it's easier said than done, but there's a couple things I want to point out here. First of all, my dad was alluding to the onus that one boat has to the other as far as at what point, and not necessarily at the 2-boat length circle, but at 5 or 10 boat lengths before the mark, at what point the boats were overlapped. Maybe I get accused of talking too much on the race course anyway, but this is one time where it is not a bad idea to make a gentle person announcement that we are overlapped or we're not overlapped. A lot of people might get irritated and say, you know, we're not at 2 boat lengths yet. That's not the point. I think that you do two things. First of all, you establish this onus, but some people in this position here will conveniently forget that you are down there if you happen to be this red boat. And I think that it is, for a lot of different reasons, it's good to get people's attention. You know, a lot of times when you're waiting until the 2-boat length circle and it's blowing 15 or 20 miles an hour, that line, that imaginary line, can approach your boat relatively quickly. So I just don't think it's a bad idea in a very polite way to announce at 5 boat lengths that you are overlapped, with the understanding that you know that that individual might pleasantly snap back that, you know, we're 5 boat lengths from the mark. But I think there's a couple rules of thumb here as far as this cartwheel goes. And I don't want to only talk about cartwheels, but I want to emphasize that the jibe mark is the mark that you can gain the most or lose the most. if you find yourself being in this position, and this is a very easy position to get into by the sheer fact that if you remember, let's just concentrate on the blue boat and the white boat. Remember, it's very easy if you've gone a little bit high in the beginning of the weather leg, the first 2/3 of the weather leg, let's say. It's very easy for the blue boat to appear faster just because the angles are opening up, the puffs are coming in from behind, and the blue boat can steer down to get an overlap position. This is just exaggerated the more boats you have around. So it is easy to get yourself caught out here. But rather than being caught on the outside of as what we say, a cartwheel, it's better to slow your boat down, and it's much safer to be here. And when you finally turn the mark, I'll move the mark rather than the boats, to be in this position rather than to be out here. Because once you're at least, I'll estimate, 3 boats away from the mark, you're at least 2 boat lengths from the mark once they all turn. So now the green boat actually has right away on the white boat. So you do whatever you can to not be on the outside of a cartwheel. The distance that you'll lose, especially in boats with spinnakers and any breezes over 8 miles an hour or so, the distance you'll lose will be phenomenal. More so than any mark out on the course. It's better to slow yourself down, lay down below the transoms of these boats. It might even require a jibe, but even if it doesn't, it's better to lay down and be on the mark rather than it is to be on the outside of a cartwheel. And this is a key time. We're not talking necessarily about boat handling or teamwork in the boat, but this is a time to be able to communicate with your crew to let them know what you're doing, because there's a lot of close maneuvering down in this area. Is there anything I've left out here that you guys see? Any questions on the jibe mark?
How quickly after rounding the jibe mark could a now lured boat luff up a boat that's rounded inside but behind it?
I think you have to be out of the general proximity of the mark. I think you have to be beyond it. And in a way that if it were the red boat and the blue boat, you have to be beyond that mark so that you're not luffed into it.
We just went on our first downwind leg of the course and went around the jibe mark, and we're ready to go on the next down, and we're going to go dead down to the leeward mark to go back upwind at the finish. But before we do that, let's assume that we had marks to starboard approaching this same mark. We just went around to port, and now rather than jibing around it, we're going to tack around it and see what difference there will be. And we have to get some basic understandings now in this situation, because let's assume this is a jibe mark here. We know that this blue boat here can jibe in front of the red boat without any problem. It's just a matter of the boom coming over and jibing around. I'm not talking about them being overlapped and where we worry about a boom hitting, but the red boat's just behind the blue boat, and it jibes and goes around the mark. However, in this situation, they're going to tack around the mark. And is there a difference? There certainly is. In this situation, the white boat cannot tack in front of the green boat, just as if we were talking about the tacking rule before, unless it can get around and get on its close-hauled course on port and clear this boat, whether it's on port or starboard, however you're rounding them. You cannot tack in front of the boat. You can jibe in front of the boat, but you can't tack in front of it. One extra thing we should keep in mind, to keep that boat from tacking, however, for at least 2 to 3 boat lengths past the mark, the boat behind can't go above close-hauled course. It can only stay on its close-hauled course. And then to keep this boat from tacking. But it can't tack unless it can clear the starboard tack boat in this situation that's coming around the mark behind. The mark does not give it any right-of-way to tack. And many times you'll hit that at a weather mark, and it's the boat in front just conveniently seems to forget that it cannot tack in front of you. It can jibe and not tack. Anyone in on that? Okay, now we've jibed around the mark, and we're on our dead down course. Let's assume the wind's shifted or the course is set in such a way that we're going dead down. This is where, again, you have to keep in mind starboard and port, because dead down, you'll be able to go either way. And you have to be very careful, and I think Matt's going to explain the tactics of going dead down, and it's becoming more and more in the interlay class. We sail those almost every race. We have a dead down course, and there's a lot of tactics in that, and more people want to sail off-wind legs like that rather than just the old-fashioned reach. So starboard and port apply, and in this situation you can do that. You can have that situation come up where you're going dead down and you're on starboard tack. Let's make it on port tack here. On port tack, and the overtaking boat breaks through to about here, but still hasn't gone clear ahead. And it doesn't want to lay way off and get 2 boat lengths apart, and it can't get clear ahead, but otherwise there's no mast line position. In this situation, it could jibe and jibe back, have a new overlap situation, and have the right to left. So that's when we talked about either tack or jibe. That would be a situation going dead down where to break that overlap you could jibe and jibe back. In that situation I would hail to make certain that the boat to your weather understands what you're doing. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, going towards which we call the drop mark or the leeward mark, whatever, that's when you got to be thinking about the fact that you're going to go upwind, how you're going to round that, where you're going to be when you get to that situation. All these rules we talked about at the jibe mark apply here again. You have, of course, the 2 boat length imaginary circle, and there's all kinds of ways that you can avoid having an overlap put on you if you're the lead boat, just like Lou had mentioned before on the weather mark. In this situation, just before the outside green boat hits this 2 boat length circle, it could go in a course like this, still hit the circle out here, and it's avoided the overlap of what was going to be the inside boat. Very good maneuver. Just make sure everybody around understands what the rule is when you do it. But it's where you hit this 2 boat length circle is very important. You don't always hit it head on to the mark. You have to be very careful of boats coming in here. The larger the fleet, the more they get stacked up coming in here, and you're in here, or you're out here, and they're in here, and you have to be very careful on that round. So Matt, why don't you give us some tactics on what you think about as you're approaching a dead down drop mark.
Okay. Again, I'll assume that we're going marks to port. Just a couple things on going dead downwind. I think that people have a tendency to get farther away from the rum line between the weather mark and the leeward mark than what is necessary, because only in extremely light air will your boat accelerate more on an angle than it would if you go straight for the mark going dead downwind. As we, though, get closer to the leeward mark, being in position for the upwind leg is what is primarily on our mind. And of course, the ideal position is to lead everybody around the mark, but more importantly is to make a good tight rounding so that you have control of what you want to do on the next leg more than anything else. I think that oftentimes what we'll do is work our way out to right near the end so that we're out on the left-hand side if it's marks to port, and then you have all the right of way in the world when you jibe over on the starboard and you're laying the leeward mark, and you can get overlap on the boats out there. But I think, again, same type of idea. If you find yourself out here on the right-hand side, it is better to be behind a boat and round the leeward mark directly behind this green boat in that position than it is to be on the outside, or more realistic position, trying to be here to break an overlap. So again, this position here and obviously here is significantly better than being in here. So is there something else as far as any questions as far as how to approach the dead downwind leeward marks? I think that's probably one of the more straightforward mark roundings that we have compared to something like the jibe mark.
Only in light air, Matt, you wouldn't worry about
jiving, trying to reach for speed?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on, finding what light area is. I think, it depends on whether or not you're accelerating. Depends on two major things. It depends on the velocity of the wind and whether or not you accelerate from going dead downwind to 20 or 30 degrees off of dead downwind. That's one reason why you would jibe. Another reason why you would jibe is if you're in a small lake and the puffs are coming from one side and you might see the boats going upwind, getting more breeze on one side or the other. That would be a very legitimate reason to jibe or to head over to that side that has more velocity.
How are you playing the shifts off wind? I mean, if you're getting the same kind of shifts off wind or dead downwind that you are to weather, exactly what are you looking for there?
Well, I think one of the most key things my dad said several minutes ago was laying down in the puffs and going up in the lulls. And that really is the same type of philosophy of what Jeff and you are bringing up as far as going dead downwind. I think when we get a puff, we'll go as dead downwind as we can, as long as that's aiming basically for the mark. As the puff would die, if it's light enough that we're truly going to accelerate, then we accelerate the boat up a little bit. You'll see in drifting conditions, the boats will be looking like catamarans or ice boats jibing out because you accelerate so much more as you head up towards the wind. You ventilate your boat. You get more speed. You're on a reach instead of going dead downwind. But once the breeze picks up, and I hesitate to name a velocity, but I'll say 5 to 7 miles an hour, it is significantly better to go dead downwind to the wind, to the mark, than it is to try to accelerate. That's just wasted distance. It's similar to what I was talking about when you overstand the mark. That 10 degrees you lay off from a beat to 10 degrees off of going a close hauled beat is not speed that you've picked up. It's very similar to these 10 degrees from going dead downwind to going off the wind a little bit. I think the only exception is in small lakes or in puffy conditions where you'll get more velocity.
And if you get, as opposed to puffs, if you get a shift, 10 degree shift, what are you going to do?
Well, it depends. If we're, let me get our boats out of the way here. If we're the green boat, we're all by ourselves, and let's just put an average wind velocity, let's say it's blowing 8, and if the wind would shift 20 degrees out that way, and it's been shifting 20 degrees each side the entire day, if we're on port tack like that, and the wind would shift that direction, we would lay down to continue going dead downwind, knowing that sooner or later the wind would come back and we'd head that way. Same, I guess, would go if it went this way. We would jibe, but I guess what we're saying, and what I'm saying is that we're keeping ourselves close to that rum line and holding it, as we say, keeping in the bank for when, if the wind had gone that way and we're on starboard tack, we lay down here so that when it does come back, we can head back up and ventilate the boat to get more speed.
How do you position yourself relative to a pack of overtaking boats at different points in the lake?
Can you repeat those questions, Matt, as I ask?
Yeah. The question is, how do you position yourself when you have a pack of overtaking boats behind you? And again, this will, because people have a tendency to spread out, this becomes a bigger issue as you get closer to the mark. It's a big issue at the weather mark as far as the boats that just put up their spinnakers behind you. It's also an extremely big issue as you get down to the leeward mark. I think that the safest thing to do is to get yourself out, if they're to a point where being directly downwind of them is affecting your speed significantly, is to get in a position that is on the outside of their puff but on the inside of getting an overlap to the mark. I think from the last third of each leg, you should constantly be concerned about getting yourself on the inside of the next mark. And if that means putting yourself on the inside over here, then any puff that they bring down, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to draw even to them, but you'll still be on the inside. So we're the last third of every leg, the free legs of the course, we're constantly working ourselves over to be on the inside at the next mark. And I think that people take that for granted, but somebody out there is getting on the outside of these cartwheels all the time. And I think you need to do whatever you can, again, if you're the white boat, to drop back and be over here rather than to be on the outside.
Let's round this mark, and now we go towards the finish line. And we're approaching the finish line. Let's presume this is our second time around, and we've gone a triangle around and then dead down and going back upwind. We're approaching the finish line, and what rules come into play? Of course, going upwind, we hit all the same wind rules that apply going upwind as we had on our first beat. There is one extra rule that we run into going upwind, going to the finish line, that I hesitate even getting into because I've never hit it, and all the time we've discussed it over the years. But we just have to mention it, and I can almost tell you to forget it, but you still have it back in your mind, I suppose, that there is an entirely different situation here, and of all the rules I think they ought to take out, and their change would be this one, and that is if, as compared to all these other situations, if the finish line, one of the finish line marks is an obstruction, and the lured boat in this situation cannot fetch it, cannot go past it, and has to tack, it would hail the boat to weather. If the boat to weather cannot fetch it either, it has to tack, and just like the same obstruction situation we have, whether it's a right-of-way or an obstruction, it must tack, and this boat must initiate its tack before it completes its tack. No problem. But supposing the white boat in this situation can fetch this finish line, as compared to where we have all the other situations in this situation where it's a starboard tack boat, and say in this situation the white boat could cross this starboard tack boat, but still it has to stay clear of the lured boat. In this situation, if it can fetch this, it just hails back. It can fetch the lured end of the mark, or words to that effect, and this boat then must stay out of the way. If it hails the second time, this boat must tack, and this boat has just fouled it, and it must take its penalty. Either be disqualified or do its turns or take a percentage penalty or whatever. It's a strange rule. It's in the rules. You should know it, but it just doesn't happen that often. But in the back of your mind, you got to keep just that you have heard it. And I think, though, when we're going on a finish line, it's just like a starting line. It has, most of the time, unfortunately, a favored end. So, Matt, how do you approach a finish line going upwind?
Okay, a lot of the factors that we talked about going into the weather mark are the same as what you'd look at for the finish line, except there will be, where at the weather mark, the mark side is always favored. You might have an instance where the boat would be favored. This is another one of areas where I rely heavily on the people sailing with me to be able to figure out which end is favored. It's an eyeball, just like we were talking about whether or not there's a sag in the line. Figuring out which end is closest is something that you need to use the people on your boat to try to help you find. But it's very similar. Once you choose which end is closest, you want to round, or excuse me, you want to finish that across that line at that end. Meaning, whenever you, let's say you've chosen that the race committee boat is the favored end. If you finish here, you've basically wasted this distance if that race committee boat truly is the favored end. So whenever you pick an end of the finish line that is the way to go, you want to finish at that end. If that's the race committee boat that's favored, you want to round it around that boat. If you see again, if you watch a race, the top fleet will always finish near the end that they thought was favored. So again, without getting specific tactics that we talked about around a mark, whichever end you pick, you choose that or you approach that as if it was the weather mark. And using a lot of the same types of things as far as locking somebody up and putting yourself in a position so that you're in control going into the line. You have something to add there?
That's good. To go across the line, all you have to do is cross the line. And it's any part of your boat. Your crew doesn't count as it does being over the line. but any part of your boat, as long as it's in its normal position, once it crosses the line, if you were, for example, in current and couldn't get clear across the line, you finished. But you have to stay clear of all the other boats finishing. So that's something you should keep in mind. Once you cross the line, stay clear of the other boats that are still finishing, but you finish it as soon as your bow went across. I want to go over some specific rules now and answer any other questions we have. I mentioned onus. There are some other onuses that we're obliged to be aware of in our racing rules. And onuses are, again, rather than going into a protest, you might say even Stephen, where it's my testimony against yours and how the race committee hears it. On an onus, the difference is it's whether, if I have an onus, I have to show that I sailed by the rules. It's my obligation to get that over. And so my responsibility in that protest is different than yours if I have to fulfill an onus. What are the onuses? When a yacht tacks or jives into a right-of-way position, must establish or satisfy the protest committee that it did it within time. We've discussed that. Claiming room when you didn't have it before, we discussed that going downwind. Claiming overlap broken when you didn't have it before, when it was on your boat before, and when hailing to tack an obstruction on a right-of-way must prove to the committee that you did keep clear of the hailing boat. Hails, when are we required to hail? We hail on a mast to beam situation. We hail for room to tack in an obstruction, and the responding hail, either if we're going to respond, we say you tack. Hailing when a boat is anchored. Keep in mind that a boat is anchored has a right-of-way on a boat on a tack. So if a boat is anchored, it should let you know it's anchored, but then you stay clear of that boat that's anchored, or that's aground, or that would have turned over. It's the right-of-way boat as far as you're concerned. You must stay clear. Hailing that you're going to protest and acknowledging an infringement. One more thing I want to make clear before we leave, though, the rounding the mark, and on a downwind mark, and I think we touched on it, but I want to make sure it's clear. I want to distinguish between going around a weather mark and a leeward mark on opposite tacks. Remember on the weather mark we said if you're going around on opposite tacks, you approach the weather mark on opposite tacks, it's as if the mark's not even there. It's whether or not how the starboard and tack rule applies. Going around a leeward mark, however, whether the inside boat is on port or starboard makes no difference. It's whether or not it had established the overlap on the outside boat when the outside boat had reached the two-boat length circle. Important to remember those two distinctions there. One other onus that we should mention, and that's on starboard and port, although it's not an onus. There are appeals cases, which we really haven't discussed too much, but besides having rules, we have U.S. Sailing Association appeals cases that are appealed to it from different protests throughout the sailing fraternity during a particular year that are heard by this appeals committee. And there's also the IYRU appeals committee. And both of these appeals are printed. If you're sailing in the States on our U.S. Sailing Association appeals cases, on starboard and port, the port tack boat must prove that it followed the rules crossing the starboard tack boats. So there is, in effect, an onus. That wouldn't be the case if you're sailing, for example, in Europe or even Canada, but it would apply in the United States. So keep in mind, it's another reason that you just don't want to monkey around too much if you're in port tack on starboard and port. And finally, we have a third-party protest. If two boats can rationalize that the collision they were involved in, they decide they're not going to protest, a third boat that sees that collision can wait till the time for filing a protest is over and to find out that there's been no protest filed. They can go in and file a protest against the two boats, and both boats will be disqualified. if there were a collision. And if there were a collision, the only defense of that is that the collision was minor and unavoidable. And I don't think we should be misled on that. That means that if you had no steerage. But if you had steerage, there was no excuse for the collision. And as far as I'm concerned, and that's why I feel about all the rules, that they're there to abide by. And I think if we don't know the rules, then we ought to stay clear. And if we do know them, and of course we should study them as much as we can, we ought to sail by them, and that way have fair sailing. And if someone has not followed the rules, I don't think there's this I owe you one or you owe me one or something. A protest should be lodged, or the penalty should be taken. And if there is a collision and neither party does anything, I think there should be a third-party protest. That's the only way I think we keep sailing fair. And that's the whole purpose of studying the rules and studying the tactics. The question that was just raised, and that something that can happen and does every so often come up, is that supposing that boats are close hauled, for example, just one example, and going into a finish line, the finish line here, and they got to cross inside here, when can this white boat not permit the red boat to go in between those two marks for the finish? I mean, tactically, maybe it wants to hold it up till another boat goes across or whatever. The old rule used to be that, and I don't want to discuss it because it's not the rule anymore, but you could take a boat past the mark once you got the two boat length circle, as long as you hailed and you went to yourself. That's not the rule anymore. But in this situation, whatever this white boat intends to do, it must do before it reaches that two boat length circle, and it must stay away from that two boat length circle, as long as it has tactical luffing rights. And of course, once this red boat would get mast line, then it must go back to its proper course, which is to go to the finish line. But so long as it kept this tactical luff, this right to head to win, if it wants to, as long as it doesn't get to that two boat length circle, it could take it past there. But once it gets to the two boat length circle, then it must give this inside boat room to pass between it and the finish line. And you can do the same thing, of course, on the other side. And just again, going back to the starting line, we made that a perfect line. I'm talking about the barging rule on this side. If the line were very much favored so that everybody was crossing it, bless the race committee, but if that's the way you had to cross the line, then you would have the same situation on the anti-barging rule here. It just would be in reverse, but on port tack. That's the broad stroke, I guess you'd say, of the rules that you're going to run up against in your routine sailing this summer. Again, it's the same thing for the tactics. We could spend, we have a course, for example, we have at our club that it's a 4-hour course just on rules only without going over anything in tactics. So we try to fit both tactics and rules together. We hope that you could follow us, and hope that you have a good sailing season this year.
Upon reviewing this tape now, I find that there were a couple of things that I wished I would have gone over at the time, so let me quickly go through those. One is when we were describing, right after rounding the weather mark, how a boat coming from astern and then it's in the process of passing a boat to leeward, that the weather boat cannot lay down on that boat. In contrast to that, if you're going upwind and you're the weather boat, you can lay down on a boat to your leeward so long as you don't physically affect that boat's course through the water. And so that's quite a difference between going upwind and downwind, and it's just something to keep in mind. And you'll want to do that. Sometimes tactics would be that you would lay down on a boat to maybe take its wind or at least get closer to keep it from tacking or something. The other thing that's come up that we didn't cover, and particularly in our kind of sailing, lake sailing, you do have those occasions where a boat, say on starboard tack going upwind, will also be approaching a boat coming downwind on starboard tack with a spinnaker, or just downwind, sailing free. We know that the boat on the wind has a right-of-way, but the reason for that is, it is the leeward boat. And when you think about it, as it approaches that boat, it is to leeward of the boat that's running free. And whether you have to analyze it that way or not, just keep in mind that boats on the same tack approaching each other, the boat on the wind has the right-of-way. Another thing we want to discuss too are the penalties. Supposing we're all going to do it, we have fouled a boat. Now, how do we exonerate ourselves? Each class has its own way of permitting exoneration. For example, the interlake class permits a boat to do 2 turns, a total of 720 degrees by doing 2 tacks and 2 jibes. And for example, if you foul someone on port tack like we talked about, you would do those 2 turns and you're exonerated. Keeping in mind that while you do those 2 turns, you do not have any right-of-way, so you got to sail clear to get out of the way of boats that are racing on the course. Other penalties are percentage penalties. For example, I know the Highlander class uses that penalty. Others, well, as a matter of fact, if you're sailing in U.S. Sailing Association races, for example, the Mallory Cup, there is no penalty permitted. You just are disqualified from the race. And then the other thing we want to cover now, since the time that we did this tape in that classroom, we're now finding that new rules have already come out. Every 4 years, rules can be changed. That doesn't mean that they can't be changed during that 4-year period, but they try to follow the basic idea that they will not change rules except the year following the Olympics. So every 4th year you should be checking to see if there's any real changes. Well, since the Olympics were last year, there have been some changes, and these are very important. One now is, if you do hit a mark, you only have to do 1 turn. You have to sail clear and as quickly as possible do 1 turn. Keeping in mind, again, you don't have any right-of-way while you're doing the turn. The other thing which is important is no longer do you need to have your spinnaker bowl attached to your guy when sailing downwind, and no longer do you have to keep your guy and spinnaker pole closely attached to the spinnaker. So that would mean you could take your pole down much earlier than you have in the past. I think it's going to be difficult to sail your spinnaker without the pole, obviously, but there won't be that concern about how early can you take your pole down and must it be closely attached to the spinnaker. And finally, thus far, and I think there's some other changes we have to look forward to, because these go into effect April 1 of this year, but just reading the recent magazines that are giving some suggestion of these changes, the other change is in kinetics, and that's very important, and we can't cover all those now, but they have been loosened up, and so we want to look at those carefully. And finally, once again, we want to thank Jeff Thompson for the effort he's put into this tape. The guy's amazing. The time that he's put into the class, again, on this tape, as he did the last tape, and we just can't say enough thanks for Jeff on that. But this is just, again, a broad brush of the rules. It's just one other educational tool that you'll have, and it's not the only one. And as we mentioned, look at the books, look at other tapes, and but get the rules so they become second nature to you, and you'll feel a lot more comfortable when you're sailing and be able to apply the tactics that you should apply, because you'll feel very confident that you do know the rules. And good luck, have a good season.